conversation about different types of racism and castes. I know when you were a young boy, you grew up in South Africa under apartheid, and your grandfather, as a young lawyer in South Africa, experienced racism himself. So I wonder if you could speak to how those experiences shaped you, and how when you got together with your grandfather, they shaped your relationship.
Well, yes, one needs to understand the political history of South Africa at the time. When my grandfather went to South Africa was ruled basically by the United Party, which was a purely British party. It was all the British residents of South Africa had formed the United Party, and the Dutch residents had formed the Nationalist Party. So right up to from early 1900s to 1948, South Africa was dominated by the United Party, the British. The British had prejudices, but they didn't institutionalize it or didn't legalize it. It was just in practice. It was, well known that in certain places, non-white people will not be accepted, so you didn't go there. In some areas, they did put up signs, Europeans only and non-Europeans only. And but it was, quite kind of lenient way. If you were very fair-skinned, you could pass off as a white and go into these places, but otherwise not. So when grandfather went there and he came across this kind of prejudice, he was mortified by the fact that people could do such things to each other. And when he went and spoke to the Indian community about doing something about these prejudices that affect them, they said, well, we have come to the conclusion that if the whites don't want us in certain places, we don't go there. Why make a big issue of it? And grandfather said that you can't accept injustice like this. Today you accept it on a small scale, and then it becomes a habit, and eventually you become insensitive to injustice, and you accept it all the time. So it's wrong to do this, and you have to protest and stand up for your rights. And so he was able to mobilize the Indian community, and he found, he was trying to look for a way of non-violent protest, because he didn't like violence, and he didn't think that violent ways are going to achieve anything. So he came upon a non-violent way by protesting peacefully, and that's what he did initially. So he borrowed the phrase from Thoreau to describe his movement, which he called the civil disobedience at the time. And several months or years later, he realized that there was nothing disobedient about wanting justice. So why call it civil disobedience? And so by then he borrowed the phrase from Tolstoy and called it passive resistance. And after a while he said there's nothing passive about this. So this this transformation was going on in his mind about the whole philosophy. And when he rejected the passive resistance thing, he said, well, we need to find a different name for this. And he invited the community to suggest a name that would fit this kind of struggle. And that's how the Indian name Satyagraha came into being. What it means, that the people have translated it in many different ways. some people call it soul force, and some people have other different titles to it. But basically what it is the pursuit of truth. And he said this is perfect because it's about life. And life is about pursuing truth. That we have to honestly and sincerely pursue the ultimate truth. And if we continue our life in that search for pursuit of truth, then we will be able to look at all the negativity in our lives and transform those negative things into positive things. And that is how we can achieve understanding of the ultimate truth. So he liked that and he called it the Satyagraha. And so that philosophy is not just about political protests and political transformation. It's about personal transformation. And one of the things that he also realized in the process of understanding his philosophy is that we have created a whole culture of violence because of the materialistic lifestyle that we have chosen to adopt everywhere in the world. And materialism leads to greed, and greed leads to selfishness, and all the negative things that go along with it. And so we get more and more deeply involved in this whole culture of violence. And now we find that it dominates every aspect of our life. Our relationships are violent, our religion has become violent, our entertainment is violent, our language is violent, everything about us is violent. If we have this whole culture of violence that dominates us, we cannot create peace in that kind of an atmosphere. So the only thing that can help produce peace in the world is by transforming that culture of violence to a culture of non-violence, which brings out all the good within human beings, all the love and compassion and respect and understanding. Because to practice non-violence, you've got to have all of these things. You've got to respect each other, you've got to understand each other, and it's only then that you can really practice non-violence. Which led him to believe that we cannot, in any protest, we cannot divide people between us and them or treat people as enemies. And there was a very interesting episode in South Africa when in 1913, when he decided to launch a campaign against prejudices in South Africa. As he always did, he made a public announcement of what he was going to do, where, why, when. Everything was announced publicly and published in the newspapers. After this was publicized, the day later, the workers of the South African railways decided to go on a strike and for better working conditions. And when he read this in the newspapers, he realized that the government is going to be preoccupied with the strike because that was a national crisis. It was going to affect everybody in the country, and the government will have to deal with that strike there. So he thought it would be unfair of him to put additional burden on the government. So he withdrew his campaign. He said, I'm going to let the government deal with the strike, and then I will do what I have to do. And the workers of the railways came to him and he said, strike is a legitimate non-violent action, and we are fighting the same enemy, so why don't you join hands and we can strengthen each other. And grandfather said to them, he said, I'm not fighting any enemies. I am trying to transform friends. And he said, you have a different agenda, I have a different agenda, so you go ahead and do what you have to do, and then I will do what I have to do. So the strike took place, and there was a lot of anger. They came out into the streets shouting very angry slogans, down with the government and all that kind of thing. And so it was very easy for the police to infiltrate their ranks and cause an incident and crush that strike with force. So within 4 days they had to go back to work without gaining anything at all. After the strike was over, grandfather launched his campaign, and he had instructed all his people that we don't have an enemy, we are not showing any anger, we just want to quietly demonstrate that we don't like what they are doing, and we want to transform the people, we want to win their sympathy and not alienate them. And so they practiced this, and for weeks it went on until all the prisons were filled up and they didn't have room for any more prisoners. And that's when the Prime Minister, General Smuts, invited grandfather to come and negotiate a settlement. And at that meeting, the Prime Minister confessed to grandfather. He said, I could deal with the strikers because there was so much anger and frustration there that I could create an incident and crush them. But he said, I don't know how to crush you because you show so much love and respect and sympathy towards us that I don't know how to crush you. And I think that is the key to the success of nonviolent action. If we have this action with love and respect and compassion and not treat the other as an enemy, we might find more success in our campaigns than we do.